And good morning. You're listening to WIOX Community Radio, live and local in the Catskill Mountains at 91.3 FM and on MTC Cable Channel 20. And, of course, at WIOXradio.org on the web and on any smart device. I'm Erik Johanson, Chief Cook and Bottle Washer over at the Catskill Center for Conservation and Development, a.k.a. Project Manager for Advocacy and Outreach. And you're listening to Catskill Digest. And I'm joined today with my guest, Lisa Jacobson. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Erik.
And let's just take a quick look at the weather. Right now here in the Central Catskills, it's a fair 66 degrees. I think it actually might be a little bit warmer than that at this moment. But the forecast for today is a high of 79 degrees. There's a 30% chance of thunderstorms. Tonight, it's going to be scattered showers and some patchy fog. 30% chance of rain with a low of 59 degrees. We'll start the weekend off tomorrow with patchy fog, then slight chance of showers with a high near 80, 20% chance of rain on Friday. Friday night's going to be a low of 58, partly cloudy, patchy fog, more fog on Saturday, 30% chance of showers, high of 82. Saturday night's going to be about a 30% chance of showers, then a slight chance for thunderstorms in the evening of about 20% Saturday night, dropping down to a low of 64 degrees. Sunday, we'll close out the weekend with a 50% chance of thunderstorms, high near 77, and Sunday night will be a 60% chance of thunderstorms, which are likely, low near 60, and we kick off the week with just a 30% chance of thunderstorms, high near 70, and then mostly sunny. So, great start to the week. So, Lisa, you are starting up a couple of workshops with the Catskill Center later this fall and coming up next spring, and you have this beautiful glow on your face. What is the secret to this glow you've got?
Well, that could be many things, but the one that I will say on air is that I went kayaking yesterday.
Nice.
In Sleepy Hollow, although I do go on our beautiful Papacton Reservoir, which is also equally exquisite.
Beautiful. Yeah, I just made my first trip out onto the Papacton the other day. My husband and I went out for a little kayak tour, and what an incredible spot. I really, you drive over the Shavertown Bridge whenever we're headed out to a meeting down in Sullivan County, and you have that extraordinary vista, but to be out there on the water and make it out to that little tiny island in the middle of the reservoir, that was spectacular.
Yeah, I saw that you did that, and you put them on Instagram, and you had both of your dogs with you.
Shh. No, there were no doggies.
There were no dogs?
No dogs.
Oh, that's just because I love dogs. I imagined them there.
Exactly. But so tell me a little bit more about these new workshops that we have, and tell us a little bit more about yourself. You're a humanist, educator, artist extraordinaire, based here in the Catskills. And you've been in the Catskills for a number of years.
15 full-time.
15 and change, cool.
Yes.
And so what brought you up to the Catskills in the first place? And, yeah.
Well, that's
What's the origin
that could
story?
take up the hour in itself. The quick story is that I started coming up here with my family, going to the hotels in the Borscht Belt, and from there I was going to a camp in Narrowsburg, New York, which was a socialist camp, a commune camp. My brother and I went, and a lot of the kids in the neighborhood that I grew up with in Long Island. And it was wonderful. Everything was outside. There was a forestry section in Barrysville and one in Narrowsburg, and that was my introduction to seeing how beautiful it was upstate New York at a very, very young age. Yes.
And did that play an instrumental role in who you've become today?
That's a really profound question, because there are, at my age, I start to see specific points in life that have definitely formed me. That was definitely one of them when I was 10. The one when I was 19 was when I went to the caves in the Dordogne in France. And
these are the famous cave paintings, some of maybe the oldest, or
yes,
up there, definitely.
Well, that were made 40,000 years ago, purportedly, but that's what the consensus is now, when language first started for humans, written and visual language. Yes, so those 2 points, coming upstate when I was very young, and living in nature. Not that at that time we had cell phones or we had any machines. We really were just creating everything ourselves. And then, I'm skipping a lot in between, obviously, but then going into France, I was studying cave art. I was studying painting, actually, and they took us all the way south. And at that time, the farmers, it was their land, and if they had a cave and they discovered some imagery in it, it belonged to them. So the archaeologists that we were working with took us into those caves, and we climbed in them, like 10 of us, with just nothing. We were young, and flashlights, and saw these images that were made 40,000 years ago. It was I can't even say breathtaking. It like went through every cell in your body.
Wow.
Yeah.
And to feel that direct connection to human existence, basically. I mean, to have that as if they had just left the cave, I'd imagine. There's that feeling. You
felt like they were still there. Exactly. You felt, I know it sounds a little granola head, but totally you felt the mystical essence. Everybody did. I mean, it was clear, it was obvious. And they're closed now, those caves, because they were deteriorating. So
due to too many visitors, or
yeah.
And is that the cave? I think the director Werner Herzog did a beautiful film. It's not the same one.
That was one of the caves. I wasn't in that cave. There were about 8 different specific caves. I mean, Lascaux was one of the caves, but there were smaller caves because this was happening to humans. This was something that humans had adapted to, so it was happening everywhere, and it had to do with their sustainability for eating. That's what everything's about, changing environment and having to get food. Before, thousands of years before that, humans were not drawing and painting to be able to connect with their prey. They were just one with nature. So humans began doing that. So you'd find these images in random caves all over the place. It was mostly Europe. There were parts of Africa. There was Australia. So it wasn't like they were getting on their telephones and going, "Hey, let's like draw some animals now," because I heard that this was an adaptation that was happening to humans because the world was becoming more complex as it continues to today.
And so those are petroglyphs that you're seeing, or is it different from because I think a petroglyph doesn't have to be kind of carved to a certain degree.
So define a petroglyph.
I would imagine that it's a shape, an artistic rendering in stone.
So you're talking about a 3-dimensional image?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things which was, I also found, thank you for reminding me of that, so beautifully organic. So the painters were also sculptors, I suppose. They were looking at the shapes of the rocks. So if there was like a convex and concave image, they may use that for the rump of the back of the animal because it was naturally coming out, and they'd follow that line. So they would see the natural organic forms in the natural rock. And they were flint caves, by the way. These were inside of the caves. These were not outside. They traveled deeply into these very dangerous, risky places. It was all part of the whole mystical connection that they felt they were making, because it's still a hypothesis. Nobody has, quote unquote, proven anything, but that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
That's right. And it was dark.
And so I've read that the images were both representative of kind of hunter goals as well as worship, or some kind of, there was a mystical experience that these people were having, and it wasn't necessarily that this was kind of how they were educating the youth about you want to get that kind of animal and not this kind of animal, but that it was more of an appreciation for nature above anything else, and that it wasn't necessarily about conquest. And that's something that we, with our Western perspective, have sort of thrown onto these images.
Well, that's actually the perfect question to talk about the interconnection that humans have, or the disconnection humans have with nature. So I would propose the question, why is it a problem that humans were trying to feed themselves, and the way that they were doing it was through a mystical connection? that pulls the entire picture together. It doesn't divide mystical, spiritual, even cultural with eating. It actually, when you think about the way we eat today, so it's a whole aesthetic, and it has power to it. And so the workshops are actually about the interconnections that we're trying to re-reach. I mean, we're not doing that on our own. Nature, again, is doing that for us. It's calling upon all of humans to realize that we were so one with nature a long, 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 long time ago. We've become disconnected, and now we are coming back. Nature's doing that for us, and we are going along with it, hopefully.
And so you were inspired in a number of years ago down in France, and you've now come to the Catskills, and you've taken this inspiration about this connection between humanity and the natural world. Not that these are two distinct and separate systems necessarily. So tell us a little bit more about that. So this has inspired one of the first workshops that'll be coming up in November. And for anyone who's interested, you can learn more about Lisa Jacobson's workshops. This information will be published on the Catskill Center website at catskillcenter.org/events, coming up in a couple of weeks. But tell us a little bit more about how you're bringing this inspiration about that connection between humans and nature, and how it's inspired this first of a series of workshops coming up.
You ask very good questions, Erik. So a lot happened in between from the time I was 19 to now. I taught for many years, and I actually, whether it was my natural inclination to teach like a rhizome, have a core and have everything be interconnected, I taught humanities. That would be art, history, science, everything pulled together, usually in teams, worked with teams of people. I was lucky enough to work in progressive schools, public schools. And what I didn't realize is that I was already thinking like a systems thinker, although I had no idea that it had a name to it. But what was happening in the public school system is that the arts were being pushed out, and intuitively I knew that people needed to not necessarily to be an artist, but to be able to, and not even to be able to draw, but drawing actually has to do with abstract thinking skills. It's being able to make associations, just like we did 40,000 years ago, with something on the outside of our brains, to observe it, to be able to create it and organize it as data, as information that we are using to pass on to something else. And that's a whole process that goes on in our brains. So if you think about that as an education system, and that's a piece that's getting lost. I mean, numbers were still being used. Mathematics wasn't being avoided from the system or exiled out. So I was on a quest after teaching for many years to prove, which is a Western way of thinking, that human beings needed to be able to make art to sustain their lives. And I did, now I'm going to rush the lineage of my life. I did research with scientists, and ta-da, found out that there is a title for this. It's called Deep Ecology and Living Systems Processes, which are what the workshops are initially about. It teaches about how things work in nature, and that from the smallest to the largest, from the living to the inanimate, like water, mountains, that everything is in an interconnected, complex relationship. Everything's in relationships.
And that you can't necessarily look at one plant in isolation if you're trying to understand the landscape of a meadow, for instance.
That's a beautiful analogy. I love that. That is an indigenous, I don't want to put all indigenous together, but indigenous cultures were notoriously non-writers. Everything was in a context, not content. Content would be if they took the tree and brought it into the laboratory and discovered it, which there's nothing wrong with that per se. Hopefully it's not an animal. That's a whole other, or maybe not a whole other story. But in order to understand about the tree, you have to see it in its context, in its seasons, in its root systems, what it's connected to, who it's exchanging with, who meaning I'm not trying to anthropomorphize, make it into human, but what are the exchanges that are going on, which are infinite with everything and everyone?
Like the idea of a tree having fallen, that its root system will receive nutrients from neighboring root systems to kind of sustain that plant.
Yes, thank you for. You see, I'm not good at examples, so this is why I love having dialogues. So you'll say yes. That is one of the most perfect examples, and an example. Okay, here's one example between human and forest, is that what do we exchange with humans, and what do plants and humans exchange? The most vital thing that we exchange to sustain life: carbon dioxide and oxygen. We're breathing each other's air, I suppose, call it that. So what does that make you do? It makes you think about, what are we doing with the forests? I mean, this keeps unfolding out into what humans do and what climate change, and which climate's been doing for gazillions of years, but
of course, yeah.
Right now humans just happen to have their hand in the change.
Which is something that I think, when you hear the morning reports of 80,000 people being evacuated outside of San Bernardino and what's happening in Louisiana at the moment, you really can't. It's an unethical statement, I think, to say or to deny that at this point. But so just abstracting out a little bit more. So you're taking this. It's, I guess, a kind of pedagogical tool, systems thinking. So if you're really trying to understand a tree, you can't just look at the tree. You got to look at the entire parcel that it's contextualized in. So all of its neighboring plants, all of the animal species that are coming in, all of those aquatic systems, not hydroponic systems.
Could be that.
Could be,
Why
yeah,
not?
depending, right. But the, what am I trying to say? The hydrocycle.
Okay, thank you. That was not on the tip of my tongue, but that's correct.
So to understand that all of these are interrelated and being influenced not only by us and the cars we drive and the energy system that we have as a civilization, but also by the integration of these individual plants and animals in the context of where you're looking, basically.
Right. Yes. I mean, everything is in a changing environment simultaneously. So I think that's a yes to your question.
And I think, I was just at a meeting the other day with some folks from the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and they were discussing how they were getting a little, they were just noticing changes in the levels of the reservoir systems. Obviously, the state is in a bit of a moderate drought at the moment. Nothing to be very anxious about, but just to be aware of that. And I did a little more digging around and realized that the data that we have only goes back a couple of hundred years, and they were basically looking at core samples of trees that were used, or timber that was used for some of the oldest homes in the Catskill region. And so knowing that when you're taking a tree down for a home, this is probably, if you're one of the very first buildings built in the region, that's a 200-year-old tree. So if this is 1750, one of the earliest homes built in the area, you are able to get a record going back hundreds of years rather than just the 100-year record that the DEP has. And they were looking at how those growth cycles in the tree rings change as a result of whether or not we're in a rainy season or not. And some research out of the Lamont Doherty lab down at Columbia University says that, in fact, we might actually just be in this anomalous wet season right now, and that in reality, chances are we'll actually have less rain. And then some of the DEP scientists said, well, actually, the climate change models are now predicting that we'll have more rain, there'll be more intense rains. And so then a whole bunch of other people started saying, well, actually, that makes me think now that we're just going to have this water that'll be running off, that'll evaporate before it gets locked into the reservoir. And so you have to be able to take this information and look at it holistically in this much larger context and just not say that, oh, well, the data point on the water gauge says X, and so that's the reality, and that it's a much larger, interconnected whole.
Exactly. Well, and just thinking like that in general, just so we are at this moment, and again, everything that I'm telling you is researched. This is not just an idea that I came up with. This has been like a story that I've been putting together and continues and evolves, and with many mentors and other people, like what we're doing right now. To start thinking like this in a holistic way. Holism meaning as a whole picture with a lot of infinite interconnected parts that are interreliant on each other, and that relates to the smallest to the largest in the universe, in fact, that we're like doing this dynamic dance. It's a dynamically moving dance, moving because we're in perpetual motion, that we cannot stop, which forces evolution, which forces change. And for us, that change is seen in this perpetually changing environments. And even if you go, again, way back to when hominins first, that's the new word that's being used, is hominins, not hominids, on Earth, basically their movement and their migration basically had to do with the same thing that we're doing, is sustaining our lives, and food, and nutrition, and shelter. And so that's basically what we're still doing now, is we're sustaining our lives by interacting with the environment.
And perhaps not necessarily, though, in the same way that those folks in the caves in France were working in their environment. So, obviously back then they didn't have industrial farming and agriculture, and Iowa wasn't a giant cornfield, basically, right?
I don't even know if it was a field. It may have been underwater.
Right, at that time, yeah, exactly. Which is fascinating also when you put it into the context of some of the discussions we've had. There was a recent show just about a month ago with the Tituses, and
right at the Gilboa Historical Society.
Yeah, and they had this little piece of rock that you could jump on, and all these kids would come into the gallery and jump on that, and it was this cool, fun thing. But then you realize, oh my God, this is the bottom of a incredibly deep, the Hamiltonian Sea, and so those patterns that have changed miraculously isn't the right word, but radically over the years, and how that is influencing what we see today is quite fascinating.
Well, the word patterns is a very big word that's used through all the lenses, whether it be science or art or mathematics or history or anything, because one of the things that we're doing, and this could sound very cold, but ultimately this is what we're doing, is we're continually looking at patterns, changing patterns, reading patterns, deciphering them, making meaning from them. And when you think of the word ecology, so the name of these workshops are called Art as a Living Ecosystem. It's an ecology of something. So I'm using art or looking at art as one type of an ecology, where something is cycling and changing and decaying and reemerging. And people notoriously have usually thought of creativity as art, when the 8 billion other species are doing exactly the same thing simultaneously. They're reorganizing and self-organizing because we're living in this continual motion.
And they're acting out of a natural urge in the same way that those folks down in France were when they were painting on the cave surfaces in, how do you pronounce the name of the town?
The Dordogne.
Dordogne.
There's people with a French accent says it better, but the Dordogne, Dordogne.
Beautiful. Yeah. So you're listening to WIOX Community Radio, live and local in the Catskill Mountains at 91.3 FM and on MTC Cable Channel 20. I'm Erik Johanson with the Catskill Center for Conservation and Development, and you're listening to Catskill Digest. Our guest today is Lisa Jacobson.
Hi, this is Jeff Centerman, co-host of Catskill Digest on WIOX and executive director of the Catskill Center, a supporter of WIOX. The Catskill Center in Arkville is a nonprofit organization that has been protecting and fostering the environmental, cultural, and economic well-being of the Catskills by providing public open spaces at preserves in Woodstock and Platte Clove, and managing the gateway to the Catskill Park at the Maurice D. Hinchy Catskill Interpretive Center on State Route 28 in Mount Tremper. The Catskill Center, where conservation creates opportunity. Learn more at 845-586-2611 or catskillcenter.org.
WIOX is supported by the Watershed Post, your source for Catskills and watershed news, arts, and community events, online and in print with the Watershed Post 2016 Catskill Food Guide featuring Catskills food farms, breweries, and more. Available throughout the Catskills and New York City. Learn more at watershedpost.com. WIOX is supported by the Open Eye Theater, presenting Summer Shortcuts, now in its 6th year, a program of new 10-minute plays by local and national playwrights, crafted to take a fresh and funny look at some of life's little curves. At the Open Eye Theater on Main Street in Margaretville on 2 consecutive weekends beginning Thursday, August 18th. Performance times and reservations at theopeneyetheater.org or 845-586-1660.
Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him 2 lips like roses and clover. Then tell him that his lonesome nights are over. Sandman, I'm so alone. Don't have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him the word that I'm not a rover. Then tell him that his lonesome nights are over. Sandman, I'm so alone. Don't have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Bum 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 bum. Mr. Sandman,
Yes?
bring us a dream. Give him a pair of eyes with a come hither gleam. Give him a lonely heart like Pagliacci, and lots of wavy hair like Liberace. Mr. Sandman, someone to hold, would be so peachy before we're too old. So please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring us, please, 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 Mr. Sandman, bring us a dream.
And good morning. You're listening to WIOX Community Radio, live and local in the Catskill Mountains at 91.3 FM and on MTC Cable Channel 20. And of course, always at WIOXradio.org on the web and on any smart device. I'm Erik Johanson, Project Manager for the Catskill Center for Conservation and Development, and you are listening to Catskill Digest. Let's just take a quick look at the weather, and we'll get right back into our discussion with Lisa. I think it's going to be a pretty nice day today. We're looking at about a high of... Oh, why won't this load? Here we go. Right now it's about 70 degrees and fair. There's a 30% chance of thunderstorms tonight with a high near 79. This afternoon is going to get to 79. The high, or the low tonight is 59, 30% chance of scattered showers. We'll kick the weekend off with a 20% chance of thunderstorms, and it's going to be pretty foggy all through to Sunday. High near 80 on Friday, dropping down to 58 Friday night. Saturday's a 30% chance of showers, high near 82. Dropping down to 64 degrees, and we close out the weekend with a 50% chance of thunderstorms, high near 77. Thunderstorms likely Sunday night, and we'll kick off Monday with a slight chance of thunderstorms in the morning, but then mostly sunny and a high near 70. So beautiful week next week. And I'm joined today by my guest, Lisa Jacobson. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Erik.
Lisa is an artist, humanist, educator extraordinaire based here in the Catskills. And we were just talking about one of the upcoming workshops and trying to make those connections between that same urge that a human has to paint the caves of ancient France is very similar to the same urge that a bird has in creating a nest. And it's this natural, inherent part of being alive, I think, that is what makes us human and what makes life life. And we were discussing those interconnections between, if you really want to deeply understand a tree, you can't just pull a tree out of a meadow and understand it. You have to look at it within the context of that meadow and that system, and everything from the cellular level to the cosmic. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that workshop that you've got planned coming up, which I should mention is being supported by the Catskill Watershed Corporation and the Catskill Center.
Yes, Diane Galusha, who founded the educational grants, gave us that grant to be able to teach about the watershed through a holistic system. So the workshops are called Art is a Living Ecosystem, and basically what I am going to do is design workshops that have to do with the information about the watershed, but presented in a way that interconnects people with what the watershed is, because it's not just a disconnected part. It's part of a whole system. I know we've used the word system like 1,000 times, so that may be a good thing. And just an overall definition of what an ecosystem is. And ecosystems are living and non-living things dynamically interacting, and in the common cause of living in continual motion, it forces change and evolution. And ultimately, it's so that this exchange, which you were talking about before, is because we need to sustain life. So they're just saying that one species' waste is another species' food. So there's this continual cycle of interaction and exchange. And there are 8 billion species besides us on this earth, by the way. FYI, just thought you should know. Humans out there.
And I think that brings up the point, though, because that is something that I find personally. I'm in my office and I'm on my computer and I'm typing away and I get a phone call and someone texts me and, then I'm thinking about lunch and then, what's my plan for this evening? And, I think it's kind of few and far between that a lot of us have an opportunity to pause and really think about where we are and where everything is and how all of these things are interrelated on a deeply, metaphysical level as well as, direct biological. I always go back to a discussion that was over in Andy's. Was it this summer? No, it was last year with Brian Greene, the famous physicist, who's I'm forgetting the name of his book.
The Elegant Universe.
The Elegant Universe, of course. And you sort of pull that information, and when you kind of put that into the back of your mind, just as you're out and experiencing, the Catskill Mountains and enjoying that natural environment. You really have to have not necessarily a deep understanding of physics, but if you can take that, just a cursory overview of that information, combine that with the context and information that you would get from a biological or biology discipline, and some simple understanding of ecology, you start to see how deeply connected all of this is. And you really can't, in the same way you can't look at that individual tree to learn about a forest, you have to be able to pull in these multiple disciplines to get a deeper understanding and get that to that level of deep ecology to really understand the forest that you're walking through.
Right, that's a really good way of putting it, and that's actually the type of research that I did and continue to do. And I worked with Brian, and one of the reasons I wanted to work with him, or a string theorist, is because, in Buddhism and in Eastern, I don't know if they're called religions, but belief systems, consciousness is the underlying material, energy, that everything is made of. So, I mean, there's different perspectives that we could look at an object. An object isn't just an object. It's at a low vibrational resonance. We experience it as an object. And string theory is the Western version of maybe what a Buddhist... so it's all about vibration in the end. And even in the vibration world, there are different... I think there are maybe a range of 6 different types of vibration. So Brian loves music, and he listens to the different... he knows the particles that go with the different resonances of, let's say, a guitar or a violin. He knows why they're making that certain... They call it a string, but it's really a vibration that's making a particular shape.
Which are like those harmonics, if you see on YouTube... someone will put some sand near a speaker and play a particular tone, and then the sand will arrange in a different pattern.
Right.
I love that.
Which is, if you look at under an electron microscope, any molecular microscope, again, everything is moving. I think it was Francis Perrin who discovered that everything is moving by looking at these tiny, molecular things, which are us. We're made of molecules and atoms and cells in this continual motion, but what's underlying that is ultimately light and energy, and then you move into a whole other world of spirit. However, the Western and the Eastern minds and lenses are now, and this is happening in our epical, is that a word, epical? Epic?
Epoch.
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 That sounds biblical. Change, that would be Enoch. Change in our evolutionary era, where we are actually moving out of a linear into a more holistic way of thinking. Therefore, Western and Eastern thinkers are merging the same way general relativity and quantum physics started to join, and that's actually where string theory was born, although Einstein had been working on that for years, and many scientists before him. So then underlying all of that is something that we call creativity. So if you take the word consciousness, the word vibration, the word movement, those things have to continually move in cycles of change, where something is born, and this is going to be a fast description. Something is born, something dies, it decays, and then it reemerges. That is what creativity actually is, where things are continually reorganizing and readapting. And if you look at a work of art and watch somebody make art, music, theater, dance, you could understand that as a human being. That's your world of reorganization. But that's happening everywhere with and while it's happening amongst species, interspecies, it's happening with, like we said before, with plants and humans and infinite others. The workshops are about looking at what's happening in nature in a general way, kind of like what we're talking about. Living systems processes, that it's holistic, that these things are actually happening, and then to bring people into specific content, like it's almost like giving examples, and I am definitely doing my research about the watershed, using Diane Galush's new version of her book, Liquid Assets, which is awesome, and being able to teach people through a self-reflective process of looking at their own patterns in nature about the content of the watershed and what it means. I don't know if that actually made any sense, but they are workshops that go through 10 processes. I'm reading something. It could be a piece of literature. It could be a hardcore piece of Western science. It could be something Eastern. It could even be song, acoustic. And the participants are responding, and they're responding visually. We are going back to using the oldest form of communication, which is written language. It's not the oldest form. I take that back. We're going back to the 40,000-year-old one, where we adapted into language makers because things were becoming more complex.
So that urge to express is how you'll clarify and develop a deeper understanding of all of the interrelations within the New York City watershed and how those are directly connected upstate, downstate, on biological systems, on the metaphysical level in some respects, I'm sure. It's really fascinating to think about, this kind of, hippy-dippy stuff that they were talking about back in 1969 down in Bethel during the Woodstock Festival, and now it's like cutting-edge science. It's pretty phenomenal.
Well, things, R.N.A. Nass was talking about this years ago, Fritjof Capra, Joanna Macy, who's 85. These are deep ecologists, and many, many more people. Not many, many more, but there was a nice group of people, and now they're emerging, and there are a lot of names that a lot of people have never heard of before. They're emerging because nature does this. Nature brings the Einsteins, nature brings the Brian Greens, and because we need the people to be able to explain what's going on in the world. And in small communities like ours, there are many, many of us who are having these kind of dialogues, and we get to see, oh yeah, we're changing into holistic systems. Let's even explain what that is. So, while these workshops are specifically about the watershed, we want to continue to develop more holistic workshops, and people in specialized fields, whether it's about endangered species or medieval herbs, or, name something. Robert Bollinger is building an electric truck as we speak, and his partner is farming, raising animals, and knows everything about the minerals of the land, and Fernando Delgado is an AI person who knows all about the consciousness world of where humans and machines meet. There's so much going on in our world right now, but it's going through a holistic system, and it's all interconnected with nature and environmental change. So that's what these workshops are about. They're self-reflective, they're content-driven, specifically about the watershed, and ultimately we will be having exhibits at the Catskill Center for Conservation and Development to become learning exhibits, like a museum. There will be the products of what people create, their self-reflections, reading their own patterns, and also the process that we all went through, including the questions that I'm going to be asking them in the content. So it will be a full learning tool, hopefully.
And for those people who are attending the workshops, they'll be able to contribute, obviously, their perspective and their discipline and their own knowledge. And I think that that's the way that they are able to get deeper understanding of those different perspectives and disciplines that they might not be or might not have firsthand knowledge of. But I think it's through those conversations that you're able to develop that deeper understanding. Because nobody's going to be able to go through the full training to become a Brian Greene physicist and then, a Vandana Shiva sort of seed ecologist type of person.
Right.
But by having those conversations, you're able to find those connections and those interrelations to really understand the way that the world works these days.
Not just these days, but always.
Right.
I'm not trying to correct you, but yes, this has been going on forever and ever and ever. But ever and ever. I don't know how many evers I'm allowed to say. But that these workshops are beginning. There's a handful of systems thinkers that have schools that are all over the world right now. I won't, but their name about 10 of them. So this is a current way of understanding how nature works and what's going on. It really, and when people understand, they feel better about themselves. They feel better about being able to partake, because everybody is participating. Every single thing that is born is participating in an intrinsic, unique way. There are no hierarchies in nature. While humans build them, there's really no such thing. We could take turns being as we know, the top of the food chain. We know who that is right now. However, we still are working in an interconnected system of creation, basically.
So could you tell us a little bit more about the ultimate goal or the current goal that you have for these workshops? If I'm going to attend, am I going to come out with a deeper understanding of the sort of political systems around the watershed? Am I going to understand more about the ecology of the system? Am I going to learn how to trout fish? What are we talking about?
Okay, well, that's good. Thank you for, I tend to do the larger picture and need to be brought back down to earth, and that's why you're speaking to me. Thank you, Erik. You are my anchor. So the purpose, I'm going to read right from the grant, okay? The purpose of this grant was to demonstrate that art as a living ecosystem, that concept utilized it's an integral method of teaching and more effective in a general way than traditional teaching methods, kind of like the tree in the laboratory. Teaching specifically about the New York City watershed. One of our goals is to really get a picture of the whole system and what's going on between New York City and between upstate New York and everything in between, and how all the systems are working, where the watersheds are, why they were built there, what the history is, what happened to the land and the people when these watersheds were created, and what are we doing about it now, and do we even know what water is? That's going to be the first introductory question. What is water? And then what is a watershed? And then take it from there, because I think it's sort of taken for granted that people know what the language of the time is. Sustainability is a word that I think is a household word now, but I don't think people...
It's becoming less and less.
Right.
Yeah.
And ask somebody to define that, and you'll be like all over the place.
Right.
Which is not anybody's fault.
Right.
But again, it's through the lenses of many different perspectives, just like art is, just like anything is. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, so one of the things I've always wondered, if you're looking at being able to... I always think of that Eames... Ray and Charles Eames documentary. It was, I don't know if it's a documentary, more of a art piece actually, but I think IBM commissioned it. It's on display at the John Hancock Tower in Chicago.
Oh, I saw the documentary about them. Yeah,
But it looks at scale basically, and it zooms in on a couple having a picnic in Lincoln Park in Chicago, and zooms into the hand
of... The Power of 10.
The Power of 10, yeah. And I think if you are listening at home, you should definitely Google this as soon as you can. The video is certainly out there. But it goes into, the cellular mechanisms and into the physics of the DNA of this person, and then zooms all the way out, and then it zooms out to, you see Lake Michigan in Chicago, and then you see the entire planet, and then into the cosmos and beyond, and you see how those eventually sort of loop back into one another. And I think that is the kind of fascinating, you have to have that context in these discussions to really deeply understand everything that's going on. And I think that these workshops are going to go a long way into developing a deeper fluency, I guess, in that systems thinking and that holism that is becoming more well-known and established, and a deeper or a more widely used scientific discipline.
Yes, and it's always good, and I think it's important and our responsibility to tell people and educate people about what's going on, if we know what's going on right now, and what we believe at least is going on right now. I don't want to make anything a hardcore fact, and fact is again a Western word. I don't know if you've heard of the physicist David Bohm. David Bohm was he was a physicist, and his overall theory, and he actually worked on the Manhattan Project. He was a holistic physicist, and by the end of his career, he had come up with something called the implicate order. And his theory was that life is an unbroken wholeness of the totality of existence as an indivisible, flowing movement without borders. This process was a cosmic movement in endless feedback cycles, and it created an infinite variety of manifest forms and vision. And when you think about that, that's really creativity right there. Things continually changing, unfolding. He also had said that the more things unfold, and that could be a conversation, a dialogue, the more information unfolded. He called it quantum information because he was talking about like a Calabi-Yau, like Brian Greene, like the 12 dimensions. So again, we're going the power of 10, the smallest to the largest. But just in a general way, the workshops are to basically look at what's happening in the large to the small of the universe in general, and how everything is interconnected, and specifically how the watershed is a participant in this whole picture and how we are connected with that as well.
To maybe the most fundamentally essential natural resource and need for humanity.
Absolutely.
Water.
Right, water, and not water alone. It's like bread and roses. Cannot live with bread and roses alone.
I love that. So, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today on Catskill Digest. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Erik, for having me.
And if anyone's interested in learning more about Lisa Jacobson's upcoming workshops at the Catskill Center, you can visit catskillcenter.org/events, and we'll be posting that information in the coming weeks. And those workshops are tentatively scheduled for late fall. We'll have another one early spring 2017. So,
and an exhibit and another exhibit. And also, I just wanted to mention, if you wanted to understand more about this, because this is kind of a dense... You could look at maybeart.org, which is actually my website, and get a visual idea of what we're talking about.
And that's MAYBEART.net? .org.
ORG.
Maybeart.org.
Yes.
Fantastic. You've been listening to Catskill Digest on WIOX Community Radio. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.